welcome to the FJR Director's Cut, the first one that we're doing in person. I'd really like to welcome Kevin Monk, the CEO of PassMeFast. I've known Kevin for a couple of years now, and certainly from a business perspective, the company is on a really interesting journey. So I thought we'd sit down and just chat through a few business things. But I suppose, first of all, Kev, just give us a bit of a background in tech. Give us a bit of a background to your career. How did you get into it?
A spot of serendipity. Whilst waiting to join the police, I took a job data entry, a temporary job, and I got two options: one to join a UPVC window company, and the other to join a kitchen appliance company selling washing machines online. And took the latter, so my advantage at the time, and entered into a business world that I didn't know existed. And that business was called DRL Limited, which went on to become AO World, and was trying to capitalize on this new thing called e-commerce. Yeah. So basically joined a business with a very strong founder who was out there to change the world. It was exciting. There was about 30 of us. So just got lost in that journey. And as the business grew, it grew quicker than they could recruit people in. Yep. And they also had a good ethos of developing from within, but it was just sheer the circumstance of we need to do this idea, and we only have 30 to 40 people in the business. So just lots of opportunities and lots of learning and understanding how things worked. And I remember being in the initial stages of setting up the Google AdWords accounts because the founder, John, at the time had heard about Google. Yep. And suddenly we're all looking at Google. So just through osmosis, more than anything, you start to get into tech and understand, but mainly from a customer point of view. Yep. I don't come from a tech background. I come from more of a customer kind of background and looking how tech can enable what you want to do.
Yep. And I think, and I suppose that, clearly AO, one of the big success stories, not just of the Northwest, but the UK, I suppose, from an e-commerce perspective. I appreciate you sort of played that down a little bit. One of the first 30 people in there. I don't know how many people are there now, but how did the career then evolve? Because I know you then got involved in international expansion, and there's a big gap between.
Yes. So again, in that type of environment, I was lucky that during my teens I worked in a lot of nightclubs and a lot of bars and bar stuff. And if you've ever been behind a bar in a busy nightclub, if those ever return, you start to learn how to interact with people, how to measure people. So when I joined this business, which was a frenzy of activity and desperately trying to change the world and stuff, I was able to stand out. Yeah. And the way that the business was run, it had a real good family feel. So everybody had the chance to be part of that journey, and there were nights out. And so I somehow, I guess, engineered myself into places I shouldn't be on the strength of just a bit of personality and being a little bit of a cheeky lad from Wigan. Yeah. And therefore, when those opportunities came up, and it's something that I've carried with me, you kind of look to the people who you think you can rely on at the time and who you know. Yep. So I was thrust into situations that by rights I shouldn't have been. And that was great. I was working there. And then
what's an example of one of them?
So I guess a good example would be opening up the sales office in the building that's just behind us, outside the window. They needed someone they could trust. I'd never set up a sales operation before. I'd never run a business division before. At that time, I was essentially the director of operations, but I ran the contact center. Yep. And because of that, thrust into a position of, go on, Kev, you'll work it out. Because, over the years previously, I'd built a track record of worked in finance, decided I didn't want to be an accountant because it's not for me. Joined into a commercial function, which was new and emerging, did that for a while, and then settled into looking at the operations with the same kind of commercial acumen of how many people do we need, what shift should we have, how do we measure customer satisfaction, how do you take those measurements and put them into providing a better service. So we did those things, and then at that point, obviously, you've started to build a track record in a business of here are my accomplishments. I'm pretty versatile. Yep. I remember kind of John Roberts walking in the office and saying, I need you to go to Manchester. And you're kind of like, okay. And as long as you had that type of attitude and jumped in, I was also fortunate to be in an incredibly supportive business that helped you make those mistakes. Yep. And with that in mind, suddenly you're 80 people in an office in Manchester, which is a satellite to the main office in Bolton, and you're suddenly overnight responsible for the strategy, the P&L, the culture, where the direction is. People are starting to look at you. So those things you start to build on your previous experience, and within AO, I guess the experience has just got bigger and bigger and bigger, culminating in the trip to Europe 3 years to kind of set up that operation. But it was only in essence replicating what I'd done, just on a bigger, wider scale.
Yeah, you make it sound a lot easier than I'm sure it was.
Well, it wasn't easy. But I guess in my experience, I try and spend a lot of time looking for frameworks, looking for rationale, reason, logic and actually, if you start to look at things, you can start to boil it down to simpler parts. And when you do that, it suddenly makes the problem that might be giant into more manageable chunks. And Europe was a massive task, but I knew I had the support of the guys in the UK. I knew I'd been in AO at that point for 12 years, so I understood the business inside out. So it was just about kind of breaking that down into the departmental functions, understanding what the business was trying to achieve, which was just break even. Look at the P&L, understand the metrics, and kind of build it from there, and rationalise that into smaller chunks, which makes it a bit more manageable.
But I suppose within that, there's some really good lessons. I suppose for people who are starting on their careers, and I suppose people who are building businesses, because I worked in a business that was a much smaller growing business, and we had a owner-founder who was, I mean, we're going back a long time now, but
did he have a tall hat?
Didn't quite have the hat, but he was very much, if you're good enough, we'll give you the opportunity, and that engendered a level of trust in the business and a sort of confidence that you'd go over the top for that business. You bought into that business in a bigger way, and that sort of feels similar. I mean, AO went on to do amazing things, but if that trust gets reciprocated both ways,
definitely. I think
the benefit is huge.
The leadership we had a founder, and we had, in essence, his number two, which was a guy called Steve Collins, who went on then to become the CEO. And between those two, they played a brilliant yin and yang relationship. And John was the visionary, and you would follow him. He could come in here and explain that actually it's raining outside, and I know it's not raining, but he could convince you it was. So you would follow him. And Steve was more the pragmatist. So Steve would understand what John was trying to do, and then employ, I guess, accountants like myself in non-accounting positions to almost solve the equation. And we started to just get into that. And it was a brilliant culture to be part of, because you'd made some mistakes and the business had stood by you, so you knew you had that confidence to push yourself and put your hand up, and that led to that kind of that cycle of just being able to get stuck in and really drive forward what you thought you could do. And then the other thing was fortunate to spend time around the leadership, so understand what their concerns and what they're trying to achieve, and then you can present yourself as part of the solution as opposed to sitting there and letting them do it. So it was just fantastic.
So when you MD of Europe, you was when you sort of finished up. Why did you decide to leave?
I think, and it's something I look for now in the business I run, is I think you can spend too long in one place. And when I came back, I was 14 years, give or take, when I came back from Europe, and for on a personal note, it was almost job done. I got out there'd been lots of sleepless nights, there'd been lots of scratching my head, how can this work? But I felt like I'd really grown, and as though, as much as I was part of a group, I was the only guy out there. There was a couple of other Brits, but essentially I was running that show. And when I came back, obviously the guys in the UK had all done a fantastic job in the UK. So I suddenly, I guess it's like musical chairs, where you've left the party and you come back and suddenly there's no chairs. So I was in that position for a while, and much to my boss at the time and Steve's credit, he kind of recognised that and give me a B2B division to set up, but which was very interesting, but it wasn't the same level of challenge. So suddenly you've become addicted to kind of the challenge and the pressure and this is life or death. Suddenly being part of an emerging B2B division, but part of the bigger AO UK business. I just felt a little bit then.
Yep. Well, I think that's tough for anyone who's been in a business that has been as successful from such a sort of infancy, and seeing that when it does start to mature, everyone does know there is that transition. Some people can stick with the transition, some people do. And I suppose that probably brings us now onto what you're doing now. You and I have spent many a conversation talking about where's the unicorn and where's this, but it certainly feels like at PassMeFast you found a fantastic opportunity to maybe take some of those lessons.
Yeah, I think the exciting thing with PassMeFast is part of the challenge as well, in that PassMeFast was also a founder-led business for the last 5 years, and the founder sold the business to an investor, and that's the first part of solving the equation, is understanding actually what are the stakes. Yeah. And the difference between AO and PassMeFast was that I think what the founder ultimately wanted to get out of it, I would imagine both wanted to get money, but for the founder of PassMeFast, it was very much a transaction happened and he pretty much cashed out. Right. For AO, it always felt a bit more like a legacy play. Yeah. So actually, as much as money's generating, but it felt like it's something beyond for the founder. So therefore, you're part of his journey. Yeah. The founder leaving PassMeFast, and he still has a small stake in the business, but he's not in anything day to day. It's almost like he's been taken out. Yeah. And if I would have imagined when I joined AO, it was 4 years old, another year on, the founder leaving, John, I think the business would have caved in on itself because he was such a force. Yep. The contrast in PassMeFast is that it wasn't that. It started off as a very organic idea and a clever concept and a way to kind of monetize a situation, but it was never out there at that time to change the world, to be this all-conquering legacy, so actually stepping in, the way I've described it internally to my team is that it's almost like the MVP was the last 5 years, and now we need to build this and scale this upwards. So it's different, and with an investor, you have to understand what he's trying to get out of the scenario. I'm there to generate, at the end of the day, shareholder value, but that value can be monetary, it can be legacy, it can be emotional. And understand those things, because when I communicate with him, then I'm starting to understand what his levers are and what is he looking for me, as well as then being the person essentially who runs the business and understanding what the employees are looking for and what do they think they're here to do. And so it's a massive challenge, but it's completely different to the AO one. Yeah.
So obviously we'll come on to a number of different parts, but when you arrived, obviously you got, as you say, one person jumping out, you're jumping in. You suddenly own that strategy. You suddenly own, you're maybe responsible for it. But how did you tackle that part? Because I suppose that's suddenly, I think you and I spoke about it. Suddenly everyone's looking at you.
Yeah, and I think that was an adjustment, because if I go back to some of the other startups I've been part of, or scale up, it was. We knew where we belonged in a larger ecosystem. This was literally day one. I remember it well. A gentleman called Samir, was the founder, had left the business just before Christmas. I entered the business January the 4th, into an empty office. I'd never met anybody else who worked there. Yep. And suddenly you have that little moment of realization of, okay, what now?
Here's Kev, the CEO.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody's
on his white Charger.
Everybody knows I'm coming. Everybody's there to see. They've looked me up on LinkedIn. You've had over Christmas 1,000,001 names you don't recognise checking you out. So, and that was just starting to get to know who's who. Yeah. And then obviously that night Boris put us into lockdown 3, which then completely almost stopped the business overnight. And that was almost like it kind of brought necessity to the table. Yep. I think that first 48 hours was a huge accelerated learning curve. Yep. In my head, it was a relatively successful startup. I thought I would take this business, incrementally grow it, put new things in, swap people in, swap people out, and suddenly overnight it's crisis mode. Yep. And I'm thrust the bank details, and in all my years at AO, I never had access to the bank. Yep. And actually paying people and starting to be responsible for how much is in the account. And so it was it was fantastic looking back. At the time, it was going home to speak to your wife and think, oh my God, that's it. Everybody's looking at me. So, but it basically accelerated the kind of initial bit of learning who's on your team and what players do you have. And actually, it was a positive, not necessarily for the industry, but it was a positive for my journey, because suddenly I could see how people handled the shutdown. And you learn a lot about people when the back's against the wall, and suddenly people I always say there's three types of people who make it happen, people who watch it happen, and people who wonder what happened. And you started to at least see the first two. Some people start to curl up in a ball and think, oh my God, and almost look to me to come in with this solution for an industry that I'd read the first 90 days. I thought I'd have 3 months to learn how the business worked. And then you learn the others who you thought, actually, I can depend on you. You're going to be part of whatever we do. So, and the other thing I'm a big believer in is in times of turbulence, and that's probably a reference to my time at Mag, but in times of turbulence, it's a catalyst, it's a time for change, and that's when you can make these types of changes quickly and more efficiently than taking a business that's been performing at a certain level and maybe somebody's looking for 5%, 10% more. You actually get to rip up the rule book and make some big changes because the world has changed overnight. So it was good. And then I guess the next thing I did was I quickly implemented a strategy. And the strategy was a stalling technique of got out there, stood in front of everybody and said, look, we're going to have 3 phases. One is transition. Next one is build. And the next one is drive. Pardon the pun. I love a good pun. So, and I kind of said, look, build and drive, I'll talk to you about later, but transition, what is transition? And just talked about the headlines. And it had 2 parts, basically. One is moving from the founder-led business to, I believe I call it a sustainable scale-up. And that being, you take out a founder, and sometimes like oak roots, so they're in everything. So he did payroll, he did paying suppliers, he did decisions on what gets built, he did decisions on where people sit. And suddenly you're removing that and you're kind of going through it like a deck of cards and saying, yes, I think that's my job. No, somebody else should do that. And once you've got through that deck, but it takes a little bit of time. So that's one half of transition. The next half was dealing with lockdown and most importantly, which we're in the middle of now, is dealing with the restart of driving tuition. And all these things, I kind of wanted to galvanise everybody's thought process to, this is what we're doing. So there is a plan, although secretly in my head I'm thinking, there is no plan. If I expected to see a binder on the desk which says, here's the plan, Kev, please critique it and maybe make some amendments, suddenly you're like, right, there is no plan. Which is also exciting because you get to make the plan. But I had to get a bit of a stalling tactic in there to give everybody some confidence. And if they watch this video, I apologise to you guys, but we had to carry on. And people,
but sorry to interrupt, but I suppose the fact that you're saying you didn't have a plan, you did have a plan.
The plan was to do something in absence of a plan.
That's the thing, and I think sometimes as a business leader, everyone's expecting you to have all the answers, and sometimes the right decision not to have all the answers is to work your way through it. And like you say, 48 hours from being sort of parachuted into a new CEO role of a technology business, Boris changes the whole landscape of your industry. You can't be expected to have the answers. And I suppose I would imagine there must have been lessons that you've learned at AO, at Mago, at some of those other businesses where you go, all of a sudden, actually, it's okay to be like this, because that confidence that you have is massive.
And I think so. I don't know whether I would say I'm a confident individual. I like to have a couple of guiding principles. One is try and anchor from something. So look for something that you can drop the anchor on, and that tethers you. And the second one is this: well, what could possibly go wrong? What's the worst that can happen? And when COVID started, I was working in the aviation industry, and believe me, that's the worst that can happen. And suddenly, when you work for an airport group and you realise that the airport group actually do not generate their own sales, airlines do, and travel businesses. So suddenly, that whole model capitulated.
Yep.
So when Boris was into lockdown that night, and you suddenly start to think, well, actually, this isn't. Break it down to what's actually happened. So we're going to have to carry a cost base.
Yep.
What's happening to bookings? And bear in mind, I didn't know that night, but the next day you start to look for something to anchor yourself into, actually the operating model. So I guess it gave a period of time for me to really learn how it used to work.
Yep.
Get some feedback, so rather than people being busy working, actually I was able to really interrogate the model.
Yep.
And why we do this and why we do that and what do you think, guys? And so, yeah, I wouldn't say it's confidence. It's having those two principles
Yep.
in mind to say, well, actually, going through a redundancy as part of COVID, I survived it.
Yep.
I found this opportunity. Great.
Yep.
So that I might have to do that again. It's inconvenient,
Yep.
but I might have to do that again. And the next one is kind of saying, right, okay, so actually learn, Kev.
Yep.
Work how this works.
Yep.
And yeah, it is that. So I could then, project myself as having the plan,
Yep.
but secretly working on coming up with the plan, because I think that's what people want from leadership. That it gets incredibly easier to lead people when people can see where you're trying to lead them to.
Yep.
So the first part of it was lay out a groundwork of where we're going to head towards.
Yeah. So I suppose, where are you now on that journey, the vision? What's next? I mean, obviously we're beginning to unlock. Without giving away trade secrets and all the rest of it.
No. But yeah, it's actually incredibly positive in that I as I said earlier, I love to come up with frameworks and ways of articulating and measuring and breaking things down. And one of the things the business didn't have, because potentially he took it with him when he left, was a vision and a purpose. And a month or so into it, I started to ask some of my operational people, why do you work here?
Yeah.
What do you work here for? And usually, it's a nice place to be. I like the people I work with. But there was no overarching. And if I think back to my AO time, it was, we're going to change the industry. We're here to mess things up. They're going to know our name. Yeah. And that was missing. So actually that vision didn't exist. So you then start to look at that vision. And I think a vision without the strategy doesn't happen. Yeah. And a strategy without the vision it's just generic. Yeah. It's not inspiring. So started to kind of get into that. And then the other, my main bugbear is and you no doubt see it a lot, and maybe you disagree, but a lot of people say culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah. And I completely disagree, because culture is ever constant. Yeah. So when the founder was in situ, there was a culture. Yeah. The culture was ask the founder. Yeah. And in the founder we trust. So I really disagree with people saying culture is like, if it's not positive, it's not culture. Yeah. So you have to work on that, but the way you do that, in my belief, is the values that you hold. Yeah. Because I everybody I've brought into my team and the people who I now work with, I believe in trust, respect, and communication, and some fun. Yeah. But without those three, complementary with the fun, then actually I don't believe I can work effectively. So if they're my vision and they're my principles, I've got to take them to everybody, and I've got to communicate to everybody. Yeah. And that starts to influence a culture. So we've definitely made brilliant strides going from a founder-led, he's the boss, mile wide kind of reporting lines because everything has to go through him, to actually empowering people, and I'm going to trust you to do your job, and I'm going to respect your skills. Yeah. And if we believe that that's not happening, let's communicate. Yeah. And whilst we're at it, let's have a bit of fun. So actually getting into the guys with that is fantastic. Yeah.
And that, I mean, some of that comes back to, or potentially comes back to, the lessons that you learned in the early days of coming into Manchester. Yeah. That trust part, it's not coincidence that trust part for you, I don't know, it comes first, trust, respect, and but it's massively important, because I think, if your teams have the opportunity to look up to you, trust you, then when you do come up with your visions and you do come up with this, they believe in it innately, because you've given them no reason not to trust.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the initial learning curve as well for me. So I'd grown up in a large business and always been an asset, I would like to think, a resource, and but I always looked up. When I joined Manchester Airports for a group that had an established Exco team, here suddenly I was sat at the top of that pyramid and everybody was looking up at me. Yeah. And luckily, I'd been exposed to, and these had formed over many years of the way I wanted to work, and I took lessons from certain bosses, and I'd seen other people the way they act. So it was, I guess is be authentic.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing. And we're now building a vision of what we can do, which is great fun, because getting challenging, and as long as it's credible, as long as you're not saying we're going to teach our astronauts how to fly rockets, which we're not going to, but what else is off the table? And then you're left with, actually, let's do something exciting. Let's make change. And then the guys, your teams respond to that, because I think everybody innately wants to be part of a journey, part of something. So yeah, it's fantastic to be part of.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot internally at FJR about the FJR adventure, and it's all hooked into we're on this sort of mission to deliver stuff. So I suppose if you were looking back, obviously there's a lot of people out there, graduates, people coming through. If you were going to give them one piece of advice now, looking back on what's been good for you, or what would you say to them? Because there's a lot of people out there probably scratching their heads, going, right, we've just come through one of the biggest global pandemics. There is a lot of growth in the market now.
Yeah.
But what would you advise that group? What would you say to them in terms of the lessons that you've learned?
I would always advocate, have a goal in mind, and spend some time with yourself if you need to. But what do you want to happen?
Yeah.
If you have some idea of what you want to happen, you have a better chance of engineering something to happen. And I speak to, I'm fortunate enough to mentor a lot of people in my time and be mentored. And I always say to them, what's your goal? Yeah. And it can be anything, it could be lifestyle, it could be level, but what are you doing? What do you want to do? And once you've got that, I then kind of say, okay, what abilities do you need? And what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you need to fix? And likewise, then, again, overdoing the point of frameworks, but I have this as a triangle of, okay, and then around that, what are the opportunities? Because I think if you can find something that suits what you're trying to achieve, and you're trying to be, and maybe you want to be a software developer. Well, if you want to be a software developer, do you want to be a software developer forever? Do you want to go up the IT pyramid, or do you want to find a company with the best culture? You've got to start getting the shopping list, I guess, and get the list of things that are important to you, because that way, then you know where you're looking. But it kind of, I suppose, in a more generic, broad term, is be authentic. Yeah. I spend an immense amount of time looking for people not being authentic. Yeah. Whatever level and whatever department, because that's huge important. The other thing is ask for help. Yeah. I know of a situation currently where somebody's just not asked, and show vulnerability if you have to. Yeah. As long as you've done some thinking about it as well, you're not just putting your hand up because you can't do it. Think the problem through and ask for help. Yeah. And on that, and just make sure you just work hard.
Yeah. Just work hard.
Just work hard.
Unfortunately, I think we do some work with like a graduate program, and unfortunately, I think for a number of graduates, it is the first 3 to 4 years of a career is just graft, and showing that willing and showing that.
Yeah, and if I could build on work hard, work smart as well, because you're right. If everybody works hard in a room, who's going to stand out? Yeah, it's the smartest thinker. Yeah. But you've got to make sure fundamentally you're going to work hard, and if you can do that, and couple with being inquisitive, asking questions, asking for help, asking for guidance, getting to know people, all that starts to help you if that's what you want to do. If you want to progress in career terms, at the moment, unless we go fully remote, fully digital, it will always come down to some element of human element of what somebody thinks of you in an internal environment. So I would always imagine work hard enough, have a great personality, but be authentic. Yeah. Because if you're pretending to be something you're not, you generally get found out.
Yeah. So you literally just touched on it, and it's obviously a very topical question at the moment, the old remote working. How do you think, just as a matter of interest, how do you think that's all going to unfold with, I suppose, cultures, visions? I think everyone's got their own opinion.
I would hope we'd stayed off COVID, because it is quite quite a controversial subject, and it's quite a big subject in my house. My wife says, don't say anything controversial about COVID, but I think it's
HMRC will start investigating you if you do.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is a danger. COVID aside, there's a danger in that. To kind of phrase the cautioneers. I think as a people, if you'd have asked me 18 months ago, would I not be able to see family members? Would I never go on a holiday again? All those things, you would have said no. Yep. But somehow, through maybe the shock and awe and the initial kind of response to the virus, it ripped up the rules. And as I said before, at PassMeFast, this is a fantastic opportunity for the rules to be rewritten, hopefully in our favour. I think we've got a strange battle going on between the quiet majority and the very loud minority. The workforce at PassMeFast are quite young. Yeah. They all want to be in the office. But if I was to look at LinkedIn, the majority of polls I would see, or the majority of thought leadership I would see, would be all around flexibility. And if I go back to authenticity, I think people are being slightly untruthful in why they want all this flexibility. Yeah. And ultimately, as a business, I think people have to remember there was a contract between the business and the employee, and the employee has to do what's right for the business. Yeah. Now, at PassMeFast, that's not to say we're going back to mills and things like that, but I do think we're at a strange kind of crossroads where, as there is a lot of thought leadership out there of full flexibility, but that doesn't suit everybody, and I think there'll be nuances. And at PassMeFast, we will have, as we now return to the office, an office first, but flexibility is offered, as opposed to a flexible first, and I'll pop in the office maybe one day a week. So it is an interesting kind of debate at the moment of one I try and stay out of, because maybe it is a controversial thing.
I think it does just invoke controversy to I suppose an extent, and I think there will always be different things that fit, but I think especially as you're looking to build a culture where the business is in the journey, and I talk about it to the guys within our business, it's very difficult to onboard people, bring them into your culture and all the rest of them, and get them to truly understand the vision and where you want to take the business if they're only in the office 1 or 2 days a week.
And I think you lose that osmosis. So it's not to say flexibility is not here to stay, because I believe it is, but for me, what we're trying to achieve at PassMeFast, you need to feel it. You need to be part of it. You need to be there when we do our monthly stand-ups and we talk about the business objectives, because we had a meeting a month or so ago where one person couldn't attend. Yep. And they were virtual, and we do it all obviously COVID safe and social distance. We've got some big rooms to use, but it was a terrible meeting for the person remote. And actually we made a rule then that if one person's remote, everybody's remote. Yep. But then everybody's there. So you have this strange the other way around where 3 of us gathered in one meeting room and 3 people weren't. So it's and if we talk back to the beginning of this conversation about, I was very fortunate to join a business with a strong culture and a founder who was there and able to display myself. I wouldn't have been able to do that being a silent square on a Zoom call. I just wouldn't. So for me, it's ingrained in the way I've developed and progressed. But likewise, I think we have to move ourselves away from everybody has to be in the office 9 till 5 every day, or you're not working. So it's more nuanced debate than work from home. Right.
Okay. So sort of beginning to bring it to a bit of a close, going forward, what are you most excited about now?
I think rewriting the rules. I have been working, and I'll share this as an exclusive, John. But I've been working on what we stand for in the business, and again, ever the one for frameworks and easy to remember, because primarily I believe it helps with communication. I think if you can keep it simple, the message, maybe it's face, space, and ironically I forget the last one, but it's the 3 Ds, and we're here now to disrupt, digitalize, and then dominate the driving tuition industry. So everything we're now going to start to do has to come back to that, and underneath that I've employed 5 superpowers, I'm calling them. The first one is digital first. I want to be data led. The commercial accountant demands it. I want to be tech enabled, and that's a distinction. I don't want to be led by technology. I want to use technology for what we want to do. And then I want to be people powered. And then the last one is effortless. I want it to work. You know, a lot of my background is in taking processes, using technology to make it more streamlined, but making sure it just works for the customer. And our customer is both students, and it's almost a constant recruitment category, because every day 2,000 people turn 17 and enter our marketplace. And every day when the DVSA is getting through its backlog of tests, people exit that industry. So they're always transitioning through where the mainstay is the driving instructors or the ADIs. So actually, it's got to be effortless for those two guys. Otherwise, us guys sat in the middle don't really have a business. And then we've got to look after our own employees and make sure the systems work. So that's probably what's going to be most exciting. And we're right at the beginning of the journey. So it's all ahead of us. And we want to make something special.
Well, look, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed our chat. Kev Monk, Pass Me Fast, watch out world. Thank you.